Thank you very much, Federico. Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, thank you allowing me to come and join you today as part of this presentation. So what we're going to look at today is it's a deep dive, a high-level overview of an existing or was an existing investigation where individuals took advantage of the current buyback or bounce-back loan schemes being offered by the government in Western Europe, and from there, utilizing cryptocurrency as a mechanism to launder those proceeds of fraudulently obtained funds. And what I would say is, from the start, that this was something which was quite simple in its very nature to organize and to also implement. And there was no kind of complex money laundering layering association taking place. So that provides law enforcement, investigators with the opportunity to identify these patterns. So I think we're all probably aware, we've seen the headlines across Europe, across the globe, where we've seen multiple instances where individuals have taken advantage of the kind of COVID loans which were provided to help businesses bounce back and to help people survive the pandemic. Again, as the size and scale of that rollout of those kind of benefit packages, it comes about question that maybe the necessary fraud prevention mechanisms weren't put in place. It was a balancing act. We needed to get money out to those who needed it most to continue with the growth of the economy and to ensure businesses didn't go out of business. As a result of that, maybe the necessary preventative measures may not be put in place. So it's a case now of working backwards to identify what has been obtained fraudulently. And there's a number of key headlines there. We can all probably all see in the newspaper and seen the news. One thing I want to talk about, however, is this graph here. Now, what we're looking at is the amount of applications or registrations in the United Kingdom for the registration of new companies. We can clearly see the kind of weekly average over the course of anything prior to April. Now, this red line we see to the left of the graph signifies April 27th, the day where the kind of generic bounce back scheme was announced, where people had the ability to go and apply and have access to government funds to support the continuation of their business during the pandemic. Unsurprisingly, a huge increase in companies being registered. Did these companies exist? Were they just fronts enable individuals to make those fraudulent claims? I would probably say yes, that would be the case. And as we see, as it kind of tails off, where the kind of those bounce back loan schemes kind of come to a conclusion, come to an end, we see it kind of tail off back down to kind of normal levels. So I think that paints the picture of maybe what had taken place and where criminal organised crime groups had taken advantage of these mechanisms in place. So what was the situation? What was the overview? So we were fully aware that the fraudulently obtained welfare payments were being converted and laundered through cryptocurrency. So the objective would be to identify those methodologies, identify the financial impacts of the fraud itself, and conduct and establish the destination of funds. Where were those cryptocurrency to fiat off-ramps? What was the end result? Were these funds therefore being cashed straight back out? Were they being converted to other, maybe more stable coins or sent on elsewhere? So we had to investigate the flow of the cryptocurrency, utilizing our kind of solutions we have here at Chainanalysis, which enabled us to provide some target development and also analytical support to enable ongoing investigation. What was the result? So really, we identified the illicit structure of funds used by the organised crime group and identified proceeds of crime, where those funds were being held and where law enforcement or whoever was investigating this could obviously go to actually maybe seek to recover those funds which had been stolen or fraudulently obtained. So the start point was obviously where that individual will make an application to the government, wherever that government may have been, to obtain the funds. There's a different number of criteria they've got to go through. What we saw then, the funds would be paid in fiat currency to a network of mule bank accounts. The mules then, under guidance and instructions from those involved in the organised crime group, were provided with instructions where they'd have to convert the fiat government-issued currency to cryptocurrency. They were all signposted to use a specific chain, an exchange. In this instance, we'll refer to it as Exchange 1 for that conversion from fiat over to Bitcoin in the main. So then it's just a case of conducting that traditional financial investigation where we had to identify the mule accounts, or law enforcement had to investigate the mule accounts and send where they sent and received funds. So this is the workflow, and this is kind of what it looked like, where we have the government funds being allocated to multiple network of mule accounts. funds being paid into network of bank accounts, and then from there, all going into an exchange. They're transferred onto a network of private wallets. Then we come to a bit of a consolidation point there in the middle, where funds would there be dissipated amongst multiple deposit accounts across a spectrum of different exchanges which are out there, the ultimate end destination or the off-ramps. So that kind of provides law enforcement with the opportunity to go and identify who or what were behind these transactions. That's kind of what it looked like. This is the data. So we see all the transactions emanating out of exchange one, going to this kind of complex network here. In reality, and the way we look at this, and to keep it simple, is the bulk of these transactions were or did actually all go to private wallets under control of individuals. However, out of those 175, 11 withdrawals went direct to further deposit addresses at exchanges to allow a quick and easy resolution of who was behind that transaction. To simplify this and to kind of make a more efficient work process, what we like to do is consolidate all those 175 individual private wallets and treat them as one cluster. Yeah, whilst I can't say they were under control of one specific individual, certainly there's the belief or the assessment that they were being controlled by a network of individuals or what part of the organized crime group. So we'll look at it holistically, look at it as one merged cluster to keep it simple, to identify those clear, identifiable off-ramps. And we can see that in total, that consolidation point, if you like, received around just shy of $1 million over the course of 9 months. So some of the activity took place prior to the bounce back loans coming into effect, which would indicate maybe other links into fraudulent activity, which we'll expand on as we go into the presentation. So around 964,000 in total. And then we look at where those funds have come from. 56% of those funds have come directly from exchange one. And as a result, when we look further at the indirect exposure, that will be where there may be some intermediary payments prior to arriving at the end destination. There's also significant indirect exposure from exchange one, where, if it allowed and time resources allowed, you could then maybe look to revisit those indirect payments as well to see if you can then conduct further analysis to make the assessment actually these intermediary payments are also part of the bigger picture. It's a balancing act, try to keep it as simple as possible to generate the quickest and most efficient ways to come to a conclusion. So this is the off-ramp, the data. Here we have the initial transactions out of the first exchange into the consolidation point. And from there, funds were then dissipated into, I think it's 6 primary exchanges or deposit addresses at exchanges. There were others, but probably we just focused on the kind of top contributors really. Some others, only low amounts didn't really warrant further kind of investigation. So that was the simplest workflow. Funds coming from the initial start point where cryptocurrency was purchased into those 175 addresses, treat them as one consolidation point, look at it holistically, and then trace out to where those funds are going. 6 major exchanges, as I've said, received the bulk of these kind of funds. And then we look at the sending exposure. It's a quick visual guide as to the breakdown as to where funds have been sent. So it allows some quick time results to come back. Here we have a look at the volumes going to those specific exchanges. We can see which ones would have been prioritized or favored for whatever reason. We don't know. They're still with the hands of law enforcement, what they can work out that. As you can see, the first exchange accounts for pretty much the bulk of those funds. So what we're looking at here is we started off with the initial consolidation point, which received just under $1 million US. We have a look at where those funds are being paid, deposit accounts. We're now looking at other links into maybe other forms of criminality. So we start off looking small, we grow out the investigation, and then you find links into wider organized crime and greater funds being generated. So we can see one deposit account which received 3,000 transactions during the course of a 2-year period, received nearly 38 million. Next one, nearly 400,000, nearly 500,000, and we go down. So we can then prioritize accordingly who or what exchanges we should prioritize with any kind of legal mechanism to extract further information pertaining to these addresses. So whilst we're not saying that total 38 million is directly attributed to the bounce back loan scheme or the COVID related fraud, We can clearly see that by the fact that it's first started receiving funds back in 2018, which predates COVID. There's obviously clearly links there to other activity, which is further, well, warrants further investigation. So then we have a look in that in isolation. This is the deposit address which received the bulk of those funds. And then we could go and then spin that out further. So we start looking at some of the kind of clusters on the periphery, examining the infrastructure of the organised crime group. What we can see is there's also direct sending exposure to 5 prominent fraud shops. So these will be individual services or entities on the blockchains we've categorized as providing compromised credit card details, stolen or compromised personal identification information to allow other individuals to then conduct further fraudulent activity. When we start looking at where these funds are going, approximately over 1.5 Bitcoin, around $80,000 by today's price, have gone to these fraud shops, which is a significant amount when you start looking at the fraud shops. It's not that expensive to buy compromised card details or personal information. So when we look at that, there's a whole host of personal information which has been harvested and purchased, which will again go on to support other fraudulent activity, which I think then is prudent by the fact we see increased funds going into these deposit accounts where upwards of 38 million. It's a case then of tracing back from there and seeing what else can be linked to what other activities we can identify through that start point. What are the key takeaways, what we saw from looking at this kind of investigation, this methodology? Number one is obviously very opportunistic, and looking at this, very simple fraud to implement. Low risk, high reward. At least we can come up with figures nearly £1 million attributed purely to that the COVID or the bounce back scheme. However, if we started looking at the indirect exposure, what I talked about at the beginning, likely to be far more than that. Then again, when we start looking at the exposure where this kind of cryptocurrency is coming from, the fraud isn't necessarily generating any overt indications or exposure to illicit activity. All intents and purposes, that cryptocurrency at that start point from the first exchange has been bought legitimately. There's no reason to raise any suspicions. And the way it's also been filtered out amongst multiple deposit accounts, utilizing mule bank accounts, again, is another way to kind of obfuscate. It's just another layering process we see in their money laundering process. Typical what we're used to dealing with in conventional money laundering typologies, where we already see a lot of fraudulent activity being conducted in this way. They've just put it in that added layer of, rather than paying it into mule bank accounts into a number of other bank accounts, they've negated that step and gone straight to cryptocurrency, in the belief that maybe it's more difficult, therefore, to investigate that onward transitions or transactions. But in reality, as we've seen there, to a certain extent, it's far easier. We can see every transaction being played out there. Again, what we've looked at is there are undoubtedly links to other fraud campaigns, maybe yet to be reported or identified. So it does provide some further kind of actionable intelligence opportunities. By looking at the wider picture, we then can start to look at other data sets we've got to support what we're seeing there, and we can then start to map out the OCG network, identify other people who may or therefore may not have been involved. You can identify the professional enablers, the designated money laundering entities who are facilitating this. Are there other links into more serious fraudulent activity? It's all there in black and white for law enforcement to exploit. At the same time, potentially there's substantial asset recovery totals available. I don't know how much or what kind of deposits were left within those deposit addresses of the exchanges, what balances were left, but certainly by tracing back, you can clearly show that those funds have come or have been derived from fraudulent activity. So it does provide law enforcement, government agencies with that opportunity to start to reclaim some of those funds, pay it back to the government and to pay it back to other victims of crime. Again, I think the previous presentation certainly mentioned this, and what is clear here is there's that need for that public and private collaboration. But furthermore, from my perspective, it is that kind of grey area where we have the direct link there between what we saw happening in the kind of traditional banking system, those payments then to the cryptocurrency. There's a bit of a void there during that process. So we need to kind of join that or kind of provide or shine some light on that to identify this type of transaction behavior or patterns. Again, increased actionable intelligence. possibility of dissemination to other law enforcement agencies, other governments around Europe who certainly may have fallen foul of these COVID-type scams as well. There's enhanced or embedded learning to come from here. We know what to look for now. We know that there's a simple, easy to implement money laundering process. What it does show is you don't have to have necessarily any enhanced technical skills to be able to facilitate this. Everything was being utilized was in Bitcoin. There's no need to start looking at more complex methodologies, going through mixing services or anything like that. And this not only applies in this instance, but to wider investigation of what I would call off-crime criminality, where the crime isn't necessarily being conducted within the cyberspace or it's a cyber-enabled criminality. For example, traditional drug trafficking, firearms supply, people smuggling, that crime is outside of the blockchain. It's still going to generate that dirty cash, which could therefore be used to purchase cryptocurrency on the front of it legitimately. So at the start point, that cryptocurrency derived from that type of criminality will not have any of that illicit association. So it's easy to be moved and transacted in plain sight. No need for any complex kind of obfuscation techniques. What we have done now, as I mentioned, it's clear method has been identified, and this could be shared for the benefit of other agencies. Maybe they've already got these investigations, they can't identify where the funds have gone. There's no bank accounts to follow, the trail's gone dead. Let's have a look and maybe then start to maybe think about cryptocurrency as a means to move that kind of the proceeds of crime onward. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Scott. What really strikes me is the development in this field, both from criminals, and we see how complex certain schemes are, but also likely from the investigative point of view, also thanks to the work that companies like Chainanalysis, but also CipherTrace and MerkleSign do. Okay, so let's have some questions. And I see some of them are really interesting. I was expecting something on Monero. So if you want to have a look and reply to a couple of them.
Yeah, so certainly. So regarding Monero, Dash, and Zcash, certainly with Dash and Zcash, it's not a lost cause. Whilst they are privacy-focused coins, etc., the individual needs to invoke those privacy protocols when they're conducting those transactions. A lot of the time, individuals may neglect to do that. So if that is the case, it would be simply like tracing, as you would do on the kind of Bitcoin blockchain. So what we are requiring on the individual user of those coins, their lack of knowledge and their lack of experience. Obviously, if they are criminals, they need to be lucky all the time, whereas law enforcement need to be lucky once. So if they let their guard down once, it does open and provide opportunities for us. Monero is a different question, a different beast. We're all aware of the kind of the privacy attached with Monero, which is why we see a lot of the kind of dark net market vendors now insisting on the use of Monero. There are developments in that area, but at the moment, it makes it more difficult, should we say, for law enforcement or anybody else to trace through that type of coin.
Maybe just another one if you want.
Yeah, can a transaction be geolocated? What position? I mean, to a certain extent, if you can identify where a transaction has gone and to which exchange, then again, anybody conducting that transaction into an exchange, the exchange should therefore glean that individual's IP address. So you could, in theory, get that information back from an exchange and then look to resolve that down to maybe identify where that individual was in the world when that transaction was conducted. So yeah, there are some things we can do, or certainly you can do with that, as long as you get the necessary information back from the exchange.
Okay. Hey, Scott, thanks a lot for your presentation.